Hey, welcome back, and this is Bold Like a Leopard coming to you for the last time during the Trump presidency, and it is with a heavy heart that I have to say that because there were many people who kept trying to deny that it's going to happen and say that there's going to be a plan and things are going to happen and we don't know what's going to, there's going to be military tribunals and things like that. So I wish that we never had to go through pain as a society, just like if you've ever lost a relative and you watch them basically go through the painful throes of their last years. You never want to see that happen, but it is part of life. And tomorrow we are going to see the inauguration of a new president, Joe Biden. And unfortunately, I don't really have much to hope for in terms of what Joe Biden's going to do to help our society and our country overcome the challenges of the next few years. So, yeah, there is going to be an inauguration tomorrow. I believe it's at 12. It might be after 12. I'm not sure. I know that there's supposed to be post inauguration coverage at 4 on the Sebastian Gorka show, I heard. So that's the only time frame that I know of. But I do want to remind you to subscribe to me on all of the alternative media because, as you are probably aware, this channel doesn't really have the option of growing on YouTube. And therefore, find me on Odyssey. Okay, you can find me there at one of two channels. One's called Razor Ray McCoy, and the other one is called Bold Like a Leopard. So go ahead and find me there, or you can find me on BitChute, which, by the way, is at the moment the best alternative for YouTube. The app is working very well on your phone if you can get it. Not easy to get, but the Odyssey app called Library, just like the old site Library, which, by the way, is still active, works very well. So I do want to encourage you to do that in order to follow many of the creators that you used to enjoy on YouTube that are harder to find there. Right? So that's my best advice right now. Try to use the alternative media and create a separate. We're already being forced into a separate society. That's one of the reasons that we've come to this moment, that the people who have forced their way back into power, they don't want those of us that took them out of it to remain in any sort of capacity where we can give people an alternative and a different perspective. And that's really a problem that I think part of America is waking up to, a part of America that, they stood on the sidelines over the past 4 years, or maybe they were even on the other side. And they're starting to realize that their voice, just like ours, is about to mean less than it ever has, right? I think that if you grew up going to American public school, generally they were telling you that by sending in your thoughts to your elected officials, that meant that you would be represented as one of the constituents for that elected official. And I think nowadays that cover is being torn off because we see how devoid of accountability Congress is. We see how difficult it is to actually hold any of them accountable. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. You have the MAGA movement reelecting clowns like Lindsey Graham, and he turns around, stabs them in the back, stabs the president that he was supposed to support in the back. On the other hand, on the progressive side, from what I understand, so this is something, obviously I don't personally support Medicare for all. I think it is a recipe for relegating American healthcare to mediocrity. But on the progressive side, it is the keystone issue. And if you haven't heard, Bernie Sanders, who is going to be the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, is actually not going to issue a Medicare for All plan. But the political betrayal is only the half of it now. We are going into an era of actual McCarthyism. So this is from Not the Bee. And when you went to high school here in the U.S., I know some of you might be watching from overseas. I know Chris is there. I'm pretty sure Chris is from the USA, originally at least. So he knows what I'm talking about when I say McCarthyism. The name Joseph McCarthy in traditional American education evokes the notion of someone who makes allegations with no proof and expects those allegations to be used to ruin the career of the target in order to accomplish a political goal, right? That was the aim of McCarthyism, was applied against communists in the 50s. Some people nowadays say that Joseph McCarthy was correct because, yes, there were indeed full-on communists within the American political and entertainment fields. But the principle here is that when you make an accusation, you don't have definitive proof, you are basically removing due process from the American legal system. Chris says even BCP said he is quitting the Republican Party. So I don't even know who BCP is. So just tell me in the chat if you're still in there. I think we're looking at a new dark period in America, and I don't have advice on how to cope with it apart from trying to stay afloat. Somebody did send me something. It's going to be an interesting week next week. She sent me an invitation to a web conference on surviving the new economy, the Great Reset. That's something I think should be paramount in people's minds, that we don't know how the currency is going to respond to the current fiscal unrest. By the way, today, so I know that I've been harping a lot on Twitter and its stock. Its stock actually went up today, partially, in my opinion, because the stocks went up in response to the Janet Yellen confirmation hearings. So could we see Twitter making a recovery, partially because America will be, at least part of America will be in a positive mood. They'll be able to release a lot of their negative energy that they've been hoarding for the past 4 years. Maybe, but I still think that they are killing their business model by excluding up to half of the United States, maybe even more than half of the United States, right? And the Twitter censorship is just part of it, right? You see on the right, this is from Not the Bee. It says, just the Daily Beast casually floating the idea of forming a secret police agency to monitor and, quote, infiltrate and neutralize American citizens. And it says, so this is their tweet, the Daily Beast. Other countries have domestic spy agencies to fight extremists at home. Does America need one too? And the impetus for this is that there was a story today that apparently 2 National Guard soldiers were withdrawn from the inauguration because they were suspected of here it says they had links to right-wing militias or posting controversial opinions online. Now, I'm not sure what the constitutional rights are for National Guardsmen and active duty military, but it's a concern. I think it might be a rational concern, but you still have constitutional rights as a member of the armed forces, so long as you don't implement those opinions that you have that might be controversial as part of your service, right? So those people who are saying that, oh, we have to make sure that these people are reliable in terms of their ideology. Well, so are we going to now have a political test for people who are in the military? And when we start to see that, this is really what McCarthyism ended up devolving into. For people that don't know, Joe McCarthy began his crusade against communism in American society, focusing more on Hollywood and some branches of the government, specifically, I think, the State Department. And once he had burned through all of that and had started all of this, all these witch hunts and a lot of, and I think he started going after labor unions and things like that. So at one point he decided, well, we're going to go even further. We're going to start doing these in the U.S. military. And because the American media wasn't sympathetic to the cause of McCarthyism as much as it was to, to its own profit margin, they didn't want a big anti-communist crusade, right? Because many of the people who were active in media at the time knew that they all had some sort of skeleton in their closet that could be used against them. So eventually McCarthyism burned itself out in that way. And I'm wondering whether that can even happen today. The reason I'm saying that is because the media today is fully on the side of the new McCarthyism, which I think you can debate me. I know there's people in the chat who might have other opinions. I think that Joe McCarthy was an amateur in terms of what he was doing compared to the people who are in our government today. People like Eric Swalwell, who you can see here, is going to be on the, I think that's the House Homeland Security Committee. So these are people who have absolutely no scruples whatsoever. Joe McCarthy, yes, he might have been a fanatic and a blowhard and a demagogue and an alcoholic and all of those things that led to his withdrawal from politics because he burnt himself out. But Joe McCarthy was not compromised by a Chinese spy who may or may not have had sexual contact with him. And that's one of the differences, I think, that we have between our generation and generations past, right? I think there's things that have always been in our system in terms of corruption and treachery and everything. But it's gotten worse in the sense that the media just enables this. The media doesn't really see both sides as being accountable to the same standard. And it says here, Not the Bee says, this terrifying suggestion was submitted by the Daily Beast. Democrats in Congress are teeing up another round of investigations and commissions to get to the bottom of the January 6th insurrection, which will almost certainly revisit the thorny question of whether the U.S. needs an independent counter-subversion agency to infiltrate and neutralize armed domestic extremists, who are now threatening more attacks on or around the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So they call it a thorny question. That's what Not the Bee is saying. He's talking about the creation of an independent agency to spy on and neutralize U.S. citizens. Yeah, thorny. What I like about Not the Bee, which is affiliated with the Babylon Bee, but they post actual stories that are not parody, is that they write their articles like, using the tone of voice that they are thinking of using in their heads. So they keep going, that's one of a heck of a suggestion, guy. Thankfully, they do seem to understand why this suggestion has been met with some hesitation. Undergirding resistance to any authority to combat white nationalist terrorist threats, of course, are widespread fears that Washington could end up creating an American Gestapo, a secret police at the beck and call of a future president. Yup, apt summary of our concerns. Apt. Funny thing about Americans that we just aren't the biggest fans of the government creating a Gestapo to spy on us. Go figure. Here's the thing: you might think, hey, I don't see the problem with something like this. Of course, we should be fighting domestic terrorism. The problem is that historically, governments have always taken their plodding goose steps toward totalitarianism by capitalizing on the emotion following a crisis to seize more power for themselves. We ought to be very wary of the proposals we are seeing lately that are aimed to combat domestic terrorism, especially when the suggested solution is to create unmonitored enforcement agencies aimed at U.S. citizens. So this is something that I think we should all be afraid of going forward. Let me just look up real quick before I go forward. So I'm not sure if the Bill of Rights applies the same way for American military, but it says here the rights of, so this is from Middle Tennessee State University, and it's the John Siegenthaler Chair of Excellence in First Amendment Studies, and it says here, the rights of military personnel. When the U.S. military is a party to cases centering on First Amendment rights to free speech, free press, and free exercise of religion, the Supreme Court generally defers to the government's interest and discretion, permitting the military to restrict the rights of service personnel in ways it does not permit in civilian contexts. Court treats military as a context where standard First Amendment provisions do not apply to the same extent. The U.S. military has always operated as a somewhat distinct society governed by its own criminal code. It is currently ruled by a special system of laws, primarily the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and has its own system of prosecuting violations of the code, including courts martial. When responding to First Amendment challenges from military personnel, the court consistently treats the military as a special and separate context or environment in which standard First Amendment protections do not apply or do not apply to the same extent. Other major categories of special contexts are school children, incarcerated prisoners, and public employees. Warren said that while military members do not give up constitutional rights, the court was traditionally hands-off. So Chief Justice Earl Warren once suggested that military personnel do not give up their constitutional rights. Our citizens in uniform may not be stripped of basic rights simply because they have doffed their civilian clothes. But he did note that under the doctrine of military necessity, known as the Orloff Rule, the military can implement its regulations largely outside the purview of judicial review because the court's attitude had historically been hands-off. So he observed, it is indisputable that the tradition of our country from the time of the Revolution until now has supported the military establishment's broad power to deal with its own personnel. The most obvious reason is that courts are ill-equipped to determine the impact upon discipline that any particular intrusion upon military authority might have. In most cases involving the military, the Supreme Court seems to use the lower levels of review or operates from the strong presumption that military necessity or the military interest in governing its unique separate society tend to override or outweigh the speech and religious rights individuals hold. So, indicative of the military's special status, the Uniform Code of Military Justice prohibits military personnel from using contemptuous speech against the president and other leaders, from engaging in conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline in the armed forces, and from conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. These regulations have been used to restrict political expression as well as other activities. Also under the Code, military personnel can be severely punished, including dismissal, forfeiture of pay, and imprisonment for participating in rallies that criticize war efforts, even if they are off-duty and dressed as civilians and issued or dressed in United States versus How. So I think that this is going to be, so then it goes into other issues such as, sexual identity and things like that down here, which I think is, it's been a big issue in the past too, but not quite what we're talking about here. Generally, I would say that if we're going to start chasing after military personnel who are, I would say, politically on the conservative side, the military will be gutted and national security will start to fall apart. Because while I'm certain that there are people in the military who are apolitical or who are liberal or whatever, a lot of the backbone of the military comes from states and comes from communities that are, conservative in nature. In many cases, they're religious Christians. And if you look at this controversy over the past couple of days concerning this fear of an insider attack, which I personally think it might have been ginned up, but this will end up leading to witch hunts within the military. It will probably lead to declining morale, and this is certainly one of the reasons I think that many people disbelieve the rhetoric of the Lincoln Project and of these paper conservatives, people like George Will, who are saying, well, the presidency needs someone who has the temperament and decorum to lead the country in order for it to be safe. And this is completely belied by the circumstances here, because if you are having troops being suspected of being loyal to a president that these people have been saying lacked that decorum and he lacked that character in order to lead the military, then the person who's coming into office, Joe Biden, how come he has to fear him? How come these troops are so loyal to the Trump agenda when for months we've been hearing rhetoric talking about either the fact that military personnel don't trust him because of the supposed bounty story where the U.S. was ignoring bounties that Putin was paying to the Taliban in order to kill U.S. soldiers. So supposedly there was this big, groundswell of rage against Donald Trump in the U.S. military, which we never saw evidence of that. It was just whispered among the media, right? Just like many media created stories, it was something that was largely a fiction that was created for the sole purpose of undermining his support among the general population without any evidence. And then it says here, so the massive effort, officials said, is okay. The Pentagon and federal law enforcement are leaving no stone unturned as they mount an unprecedented vetting process for the 25,000 National Guard troops charged with securing Washington this week. The massive effort, officials said, is out of an abundance of caution. There are no specific threats of an insider threat attack directed toward President-elect Joseph R. Biden or congressional leaders as the January 20th inauguration ceremony approaches. Let me repeat. There are no specific threats of an insider attack. But Pentagon leaders say they are going to great lengths to ensure no National Guard member at or near the U.S. Capitol this week harbors extremist views or might be a threat to the nation's elected leaders. Quote, as is normal for military support to large security events, the department will vet National Guardsmen who are in Washington, D.C. While we have no intelligence indicating an insider threat, we are leaving no stone unturned in securing the Capitol, Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller said in a statement. This type of vetting often takes place by law enforcement for significant security events. However, in this case, the scope of military participation is unique, he said. The D.C. National Guard is also providing additional training to service members as they arrive in D.C. that if they see or hear something that is not appropriate, they should report it to their chain of command. We appreciate the support of the FBI in assisting with this task, and for each of the more than 25,000 guardsmen who answered their nation's call and rapidly deployed to Washington. Mr. Biden's inauguration on Wednesday will come 2 weeks after pro-Trump rioters stormed the Capitol, temporarily delaying lawmakers' final affirmation of the president-elect's victory. Ongoing federal investigations have raised concerns about the participation of military veterans or perhaps even active duty personnel in the violence. Last week, the Justice Department charged Virginia police officer Jacob Fracker in connection with the Capitol riot. Mr. Fracker reportedly is a corporal in the Virginia National Guard. So that is an interesting story. But for like what I think is very interesting is that I mean we could actually look at the figures. So Larry Gerke is, let me see here. You were right, Prometheus. I was wrong. Right about what? Be more specific, Larry. Um, so you have one National Guard member, and we have the United States National Guard, which consists of 450,000 personnel. And yes, you had a person who was caught, who participated in the Capitol Hill riot, who was a National Guard member. But I can tell you, living where I live, I see people who are on the street from the National Guard, right? You see people like, I don't see them in full uniform or anything usually, but they're visible and they're members of the community. So are we going to go now, and many of these people, they don't even serve in any sort of combat capacity. In many cases, they serve in an auxiliary position. Sometimes they're mechanics, they're cooks, they are technicians and things like that. So the reality in my mind is that we have an issue where this climate of fear is actually going after people. It's actually creating this never-ending whirlpool of suspicion. And we've been talking about how it's affecting social media. We've been talking about how it might end up affecting companies and schools. Now today, apparently, Kohl's and a different department store, I forget who, they decided they're going to stop selling the MyPillow. And that really, in my opinion, it shows that, yes, society is bifurcating. You are going to start seeing that people are going to line up through their consumer choices, through the way that they behave in the markets, according to their political affiliation. And I don't think that that's really the way to a society of understanding, where you have completely, and I think I'm putting it very lightly here. I think we're talking about a real danger. People talk about civil war, but even if there is no civil war, we're talking about a caste system, right? There's a caste that's friendly towards the media. They believe whatever they hear on NPR or CBS or whatever other network is on TV. And they go about their lives and they order their food from Blue Box, or they might be vacationing over in Martha's Vineyard. And then you have another class that they are below them and they don't get to do nearly as many of those things. And I think it's just unfortunate. We're not going to have a unified society for many, many years. It could be more than one generation, in my opinion. This is how much damage has been done to the country due to the corruption and lies of the media. And they're going to say, well, it's the lies and corruption of this president, Donald Trump. I think that even with all of his failures and the fact that he did lose the battle to the deep state, as Chris Kroll is now saying that he's admitting, that he's admitted for a while, as Larry Gerke is now admitting, he has lost. And as much as I think that his legacy will be certainly missing a lot of the praise that it could have, because this is a person who stood up against the system and the system fought back and defeated him. I still think that there is much to be proud of from the Trump administration. There's also much to regret. A big regret of mine in these last hours of the Trump presidency is that he, for whatever reason, if he had the option, it really is his fault. If he was forced not to do this, then maybe he could justify this, right? If he was threatened. Donald Trump had to pardon Edward Snowden and Julian Assange in order to really strike back against the system that victimized him. They victimized friends of his. The intelligence agencies, the military-industrial complex. Sorry, the military-industrial complex. They needed the kick in the teeth that Trump didn't give them, and that kick would have meant so much to so many people, right? Because before Donald Trump, many of us did believe the narrative put forward by our nation's military and intelligence agencies that it was WikiLeaks that was the threat to national security. It was Julian Assange and Edward Snowden that were jeopardizing American troops and ruining our intelligence capabilities. And before 2016, that was the reality. And those of us that were considering ourselves, on the right side of the spectrum, all too many of us were completely fine, accepting people like Lindsey Graham, accepting their ideas, accepting the Jeb Bushes, saying that, look, maybe I don't want people to go to war, but it's the price I might have in order to lower taxes a little bit. The person who ended that mentality on the political side was Donald Trump. He ran on a platform of solving the problems at home and not sending troops overseas to fight endless wars. And as much as he tried, and as much as it goes without saying that this was a person who they tried several times to drag him into a permanent war in Syria. They also tried several times to get him to bomb Iran and start a real global conflict, right? This year, last year, around this time, it was in the news every day. The Iran crisis, the Persian Gulf crisis at the Strait of Hormuz. And they wanted him so bad to start a war, and he didn't do it. Because he knew that that's what they wanted. He knew that this was the way they wanted him to go down, as another warmongering Republican. But the thing is, at some point, we have to still hold him accountable. If he does not pardon Julian Assange, and I don't see anybody in the chat saying that he has pardoned him yet. I haven't been checking too frequently, but we have, according to Washington Examiner, Julian Assange's partner pleads with Trump for pardon within 24 hours left in his presidency. Pleads for his pardon. Stella Morris. And I want to lay it out here, okay? Julian Assange is, he's not a person that you support simply because you are, you're looking for a person who's going to solve all of society's ills, or that he's a social icon or whatever. The things that he has done, the risks that he's taken, and the penalties he's suffered for charges that have not been proven and for crimes that are much below the severity of the crimes that he's exposed, they make him the prisoner of conscience of our generation, possibly of several generations, right? There have been other ones, right? There were people like Solzhenitsyn in the past, and during World War II there was the White Rose in Germany, and you can go all through history. There was Albert Dreyfus, and There was, I think Guy Fawkes was technically, but there have always been people who they paid with their freedom for an idea. And I get it that we don't live in a society where ideals are really worth much, right? We live in a society where corruption is rewarded, and uh, you know, and corruption is rewarded in our society, and integrity is punished. Honesty is punished, right? Julian Assange, if nothing else, is one of the more honest journalists left in the world, right? He's not someone who publishes things lightly. There was even the video released by Project Veritas that used the audio of a call between Assange, between Julian Assange and a State Department lawyer. I think it was released 2 weeks ago, and it basically showed that Julian Assange said to the State Department lawyer that yes, there's a rogue WikiLeaks person who's trying to release intelligence, classified intelligence that will harm U.S. national security, and that he wants to work with the State Department in order to prevent that from happening, and that he will do anything in his power in order to prevent that intelligence from leading to the deaths of U.S. military and intelligence personnel. That is the real Julian Assange that the media has refused to discuss, because they're willing to cut bait and say, it's not really worth it to our bottom line to talk about the price of the U.S. war machine, and not just the U.S. war machine, the price of government corruption worldwide, because the truth is WikiLeaks has exposed corruption relating to several countries' governments, right? They've exposed corruption relating to Turkey. They've exposed it relating to the British government. I think they were involved, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. They were involved in some way with the Panama Papers. Am I getting that wrong? And they are a group, WikiLeaks, that you don't get to choose whether the truth is comfortable or not. They use those documents in order to expose what they see as wrongdoing, what often in a legal sense is wrongdoing. And think about how only a couple years ago, Hollywood was fawning over this movie, The Post, a movie with Tom Hanks, talking about how the Washington Post was so brave because they published the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers, which in the 1960s was considered to be a document that hurt the U.S. effort in Vietnam, right? Tom Hanks celebrates the Daniel Ellsberg revelations, and the Washington Post's role in it. They look at it as if it is some sort of holy blessing that the Washington Post bestowed upon the American people. But meanwhile, they stab Julian Assange in the back. They call him a Russian asset, which is just not proven, never been proven, no actual evidence of it. And this is what I'm saying, that I think a lot of things have gone wrong because of our treatment of Julian Assange. Because once one person becomes that prisoner of conscience, and society isn't willing to, take a stand and say, look, we know that we need intelligence services in order to recognize threats. When those intelligence services victimize people who are innocent, they also are a threat, right? That's where it starts to go wrong. It started to go wrong way before that. That's why there is a Julian Assange, but you get the point. You need people in order to be a watchdog, in order to, sound the warning bell that this is out of control. The intelligence agencies and the military are not being led by people who have the American national security in mind. They have their own power in mind. They have the profits of their lobbyists and contractors in mind. And I'm talking about Democrats. I'm talking about Republicans. They are fully in bed with the national security state, because the national security state empowers the politicians, it empowers the corporations, it empowers the media, it empowers the entertainment field, and in some cases it empowers these pro athletes because the U.S. military pays our sports leagues in order to advertise there. We are unfortunately at a point in American society where if you are going to let your children join the military, you might be putting them in a war on behalf of defense contractors, and this is regrettable, right? I think that these defense contractors. I know some people who work for them, and I don't think that they're awful people. I'm talking about the people who are working on these new technologies. They're not people who are there in order to wage war around the globe, but they are part of the system, right? There's a little scene in you ever see Clerks, the original Clerks from 1992, I believe, where two of the main characters, Randall and Dante, they're talking, and Randall starts saying, well, don't you think it's wrong what Luke Skywalker did blowing up the Death Star because of all the independent contractors, that were working on it? It gets kind of ridiculous. He's talking about like plumbers and aluminum siding installers and things like that. But the idea is that we don't have it's not as if the people who are running these intelligence agencies, it's not like they are sitting there wearing elaborate gowns and helmets and things like that, and saying, chanting about how we're going to take over the world and spy on everyone. No, these are people who they behave like average Americans. They say things like average Americans. They might have the same interests. I'm talking about like taste interests. They might like the same beers and listen to the same music as average Americans. But in their daily lives and in their work, they are helping to perpetuate a system of war and suffering around the world. And that's really the failure of the Trump era. Not because Trump didn't try at all. I believe he did try in many cases to end some of these wars. He did not try hard enough. It could be that we now know, thanks to Donald Trump, that the presidency is much less of a powerful office than what we were led to believe, right? Because the president is only as powerful as the people around him enable him to be, right? We do know that there are plenty of reasons, if you know anything about the time period in question, that President Kennedy wasn't really the president in the minds of certain people in the intelligence agencies, right? There were many theories that the CIA held a huge grudge against him, right? Because of his botching of the not the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the Bay of Pigs incident, and the fact that he didn't fully go for broke on intervention there, as well as his reluctance to fully commit to a war in Vietnam, right? So JFK, not the greatest president in my opinion, a very flawed president, and some would say a pretty corrupt president, but the CIA had it in for him. The FBI had it in for him because of his war with J. Edgar Hoover, because he didn't want the FBI to be completely under control. Now, I'm not justifying the problems that Kennedy himself did, where he was basically in bed with the mob and then he betrayed them using his brother Bobby Kennedy. But you see what I'm talking about here, that when you elect a president, you expect the executive offices of the government to be responsible to him, to be and to the citizen. You don't expect them to be responsible to themselves and their own interests, at least not on paper. And repeatedly, we just see over and over again that's exactly what they are. You see Jeff Sessions recusing himself. You see Bill Barr, averting his eyes, saying, "Oh, I don't really believe that there was any election interference." Bill Barr saying stuff like, "Oh, we're going to release the Durham report as around the end of the summer or whatever." The people still haven't seen the Durham report. We might never see the Durham report. The whole idea that the government, thanks to the person in the White House, is now working for you as opposed to working for itself is belied by the way that the Trump presidency went out. You have all of these levels of government, the judiciary, which is not part of the executive branch. You have the legislative branch. You have state governments. You have state parties. You have federal departments that basically turned against the president, despite a lot of evidence that I felt was compelling that meant that, look, this election was not above board. It was not, in my opinion, a lawful election. I know I'm risking my YouTube channel by saying that, which is why I'm recording this on what's it called, on OBS in order to upload immediately afterward, right? By the way, I missed the opening music for the for the recording, so if you're watching on BitChute, you'll only get to listen to the music at the end. It's Pet Cemetery, right, by Energy. It's a cover, of course. So I don't know what to say besides that in terms of the failures of the Trump era, right? Chris Kral says, supposedly McConnell said that he'd vote to impeach if he pardoned Assange. I've heard right-wingers say they'd put a bullet in him and neo-libs hate his guts. So that's a thing. When you talk about Julian Assange, right, he elicits very strong emotions, but put the emotions to the side for a second. This is a person who he was arrested, from what I understand, on trumped-up charges of sexual assault in Sweden that were subsequently withdrawn, right? And he was put in prison on that pretense. And then because of it, the U.S. government has filed extradition charges or an extradition request in order for him to face charges that he was accused of, thanks to some of his earlier leaks. And they want him extradited to the U.S. Because of a UK court's refusal to honor that extradition request, he's basically rotting in prison without trial. So I get it that people don't like him. I get it that he may have burned a lot of bridges through his publication of the Iraq War Diaries, which, by the way, I mean, look, what he published was true. Yes, there were abuses in Iraq. Yes, some of those abuses may have led to more resentment in Iraq and eventually the rise of ISIS. I mean, you don't have to like the person in order to understand that he told the truth and that people owe him at least a debt of they at least owe him the respect that he has earned for taking the risk in order to tear the cover off of, ultimately a futile war in Iraq, right? The United States is no more safe for invading Iraq based on the lie of weapons of mass destruction than when it went in. And we are, we've lost soldiers to death because of Iraq. We've lost many soldiers who they're never going to be the same physically because of it. Many Iraqi civilians were killed because of the war in Iraq, both before and after the Julian Assange and WikiLeaks revelations that relating to the Iraq War Diaries and collateral damage and civilian casualties and things like that. We need to think again about what being America, the beacon of democracy, is, right? The beacon of democracy doesn't mean much if it causes fear in other countries that are not a threat to the United States, right? Iraq was a hostile country, but it was not a threat to the United States. Chris says, I'm glad Chris is chatting, by the way. Don't always hear much from him. But he says, in my opinion, he's for what he still knows about corrupt scumbags. Right, and the fact is, like if you're out there, you're a member of the media, you're a member of the entertainment industry, and you are happy about what's happening tomorrow with Joe Biden coming back into power and Julian Assange as of right now, and as is likely to continue to be behind bars, there is no reason to celebrate. You can still have people within your community, people that you grew up with, who are members of the military, bundled onto a plane, sent to some third world hellhole, and told to fight in a war that does not benefit American national security, and likely, it kills countless innocent people overseas. And I get it. It's easy for us to say, those of us that live here who don't serve in the military, to criticize. I can tell you, right? I've said this, I've talked about this on this stream before. I'm not revealing anything new. I did serve in the military. I served in the Israeli military several years ago. It's not quite the same thing, but you do understand when you are shouldering a rifle and there's civilians in front of you, that, yeah, you don't have the same responsibility as a person passing another person in the street. You have a little degree of power that they don't, right? Now, magnify that to the U.S. military, the most powerful war machine in the world, and with all of these different, state-of-the-art weapons, not just space-age weapons, now beyond space-age weapons, digital-age weapons. Remember, the space age refers to the 60s and 70s, and we're 40 years past that now, 50 years. So we are talking about our country involved in wars like in Yemen, that, right, there are horrible things happening there, irrespective of what the United States is doing, right? There are fanatical religious groups at play there. You have oil interests. You have the Russian government over there. You have the Chinese government over there. But when you put American troops there, when you put American military technology there, and you have people basically being wiped off the face of the earth, not always with cause, right? There's so many people who have died. Even if you remember the death of the son of Anwar al-Awlaki, right? There was no imminent threat from him, and he did not have the status of a combatant, right? Larry says, so yeah, I think he's answering Chris, but I think it's a failure of the Trump administration. People don't have to necessarily throw away his legacy in their minds. They can obviously appreciate other things he may have done, right? We should judge people fairly. Donald Trump, he reformed the VA, built the new Mexico border barrier, right? The border wall. He built it up and also built new parts of fence. He scored a number of diplomatic victories in both the Middle East and the Balkans, right? He did do the U.S. Embassy move to Jerusalem, which is important to many people in the American political system. I would argue it's not as important as people say it is, but I'm often contradicted by people who say so. Ophir says, without American power, especially the Navy, the world will fall apart and into China's hands. The idea that us being involved in Yemen plays into China's hands it's just not true, okay? And I'm not saying that we disarm our military. I'm saying that what Julian Assange did was to expose that our military powers are being abused, not in the furtherance of American security, but in the furtherance of corporate profits and the careers of this class of political and military, elite, right? And yes, there were people who deceived Donald Trump himself, right? Donald Trump he had the wool pulled over his eyes several times by some of these people. Remember, Colin Powell was revered for many years unjustified in an unjustified manner, right? He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Persian Gulf War, if I remember correctly, and it was during that era that people started to build up the image of some of these American generals, including Powell, and say, well, this is the type of person we want for the new post-Cold War military, and we're basically going to have a one-pole, a unipolar world, new world order, right? The United States is the only world power left because Russia fell apart, and people like Colin Powell are going to be the moral face of the American military going forward. And what happened when Colin Powell was put in the position? He was the U.S. Secretary of State at the time. And along with Donald Rumsfeld, they lied the U.S. into the Iraq War. And it has not benefited American national security. And meanwhile, Donald Trump, when he ran for office, he had similar people trying to whisper in his ears. Remember, there were people, and I believe that this was one of the downfalls of his presidency, having people like in order to fight ISIS, and then once ISIS was defeated, and Donald Trump said, "Okay, great, let's bring those people home, our American soldiers. We won the war against ISIS, and we can now, withdraw those troops. They don't serve a purpose anymore over there. let's bring them back, right?" So, Ophir, I mean, I don't really care about the embassy at the moment, right? I'm talking about a bigger issue than that, right? I think the embassy was fine. I'm talking about a bigger issue, which is the intervention. So, the issue that I'm talking about here is James Mattis. He helped Donald Trump to win the war against ISIS as Secretary of Defense. And once that was done, he decided, we're just going to leave the troops there for, shits and giggles. And Donald Trump was like, well, what do you mean? Why are we leaving the troops there? And that's one of the reasons that James Mattis was no longer in the administration at the time. I believe that the Democrats might even bring him back, right? A guy that in the beginning they were saying doesn't even belong anywhere near the Secretary of Defense position. Once he ditched Donald Trump, they were completely fine with him. It had nothing to do. By the way, they didn't care that his whole reason for ditching Donald Trump was that Trump wanted to withdraw troops from both Afghanistan and from Syria and from Iraq. I believe also from the Yemen theater. They said, well, we're going to support James Mattis even though he wants to keep American troops there. That's a major reason, I believe, that the media and the elite class turned against Donald Trump, because they don't actually care if American troops are still in harm's way overseas in some of these war zones where they're not benefiting American national security. Another person with a similar story is former White House Chief of Staff. I think his name was John Kelly. So it's a very similar issue. John Kelly himself was also, like James Mattis, he was a member of the Trump campaign before he was elected to office and was rewarded with the Homeland Security position, Department of Homeland Security, and then elevated to White House Chief of Staff. I think after Reince Priebus was fired. And it was the same idea. Once Trump decided, hey, I'm not going to leave the troops in these war zones. These guys, they lost their minds because they don't care what the president's opinion is. American troops are going to come back home alive over their dead bodies, right? As far as they're concerned, the primary duty of the American military is to be stationed overseas, whether they're needed there or not. And that really is, in my opinion, one of the biggest tragedies of the Trump presidency. He was a person who was looking to improve the lives of American service people and reduce the hurt that is being put on the world thanks to the ambition of our defense industry and the people who enable them. and he was stopped. And I think we are going to see, a lot of pain over the next few years in different theaters of the world. Maybe in some cases, we do need to be involved in war zones overseas, right? But you always want to be cautious, and unfortunately, there is nobody to advocate right now in American government who has any power for restraint in intervening overseas. Some of you are going to say, "Oh, what about Rand Paul?" Rand Paul doesn't matter, right? Rand Paul is one senator out of 100. Bernie Sanders, who is basically tail tucked between his legs, ostrich head in the sand. Also, one senator among 100. If there is an authorization of use of military force in one of these conflicts overseas, whether it's in Ukraine or the South China Sea or wherever, and it does not have clear, concrete evidence warranting an intervention, I guarantee you that there will be a major lopsided vote, maybe even a unanimous vote to authorize use of military force. And how many of us living at home actually have to get on one of those planes or aircraft carriers to serve in those conflicts? Most of us don't. Some of you have had to. I know Larry has said so. So, with that being said, I'm sorry about what's going to happen over the next few years. I do believe that we are entering, a period that none of us are going to enjoy, unless you're one of these scabs. But yeah, why do you want an America where if you say something that is an off-color joke, or you make a remark about a group of people that was meant in jest, that you could lose your career, you could have your reputation smeared, you could have your business lose contracts, you could have your phone lines potentially tapped. We are, it's like beyond any sort of nightmare that most people have dreamt of, because it's not just the government doing it. It's corporations, it's civil society. It will probably be parenting groups pretty soon, as it has been in the past. And we are going to suffer like this as a society, where you're going to have two separate standards based on two political classes, right? And the top political class, the one that rules, is going to get narrower and more and narrower, right? You even saw in the past couple weeks, Alec Baldwin now he said, "Oh, I'm deactivating my Twitter because you're mean to my wife," or whatever. So you don't even need the government to implement it. You just need, in some cases, social pressure through social media. It is, in my opinion, it's just, it's scary to even think about it. So it's pretty late. I guess tomorrow, just try to enjoy your day as much as you can. Don't do anything that you're going to regret, whether it's hurting someone else or hurting yourself or doing something that will land you in prison. Just be, as calm as you can, and, try to figure out how you're going to do the best for yourself over the next few years. And in some ways, it's every man or woman for himself or herself for the next few years. But yeah, we're going to have to start thinking about ways to, resist this type of behavior, this Inquisition against normal American criticism of the government and the people who run it. So that's about it for today. I want to thank you guys. In fact, I think most of you that commented today are longtime listeners, or even people who have been on the stream. So thanks, Larry, Chris, and Ophir, and all the other people who tuned in. And I'll talk to you later. Have a great night.